intended this week to share some stories of our UU history that exemplify who we are and what we're all about as a faith tradition. However, most of us have been pretty shaken by the past few days and the new leadership in the White House. So I decided to choose a few of our important UU stories to share, not just for their ability to demonstrate our faith. I selected these stories because they're models in this moment when we feel deeply concerned about the future of our country and the safety of those that we care about. This first story isn't so much about an individual hero as it is about a couple of really good friends. Each of them was a remarkable woman in her own right, but there was also a magic that occurred between them. I'm talking about Susan B. Anthony and Olympia Brown. Susan B. Anthony was born in 1820 in Massachusetts. When she was 6 years old, her family moved to New York. The local teacher refused to teach her long division, which outraged her father. So he set up a group homeschool where she was educated with other children. In 1852, she began what became a campaign for women's suffrage and equal pay. Unlike many of the women of the suffrage movement, Susan B. Anthony remained free from the responsibilities of married life or raising children. She became a tireless campaigner. For 45 years, she traveled the United States and Europe, giving an average of 100 speeches a year. In 1872, she cast a vote illegally in Rochester, New York, in the election. Anthony was subsequently arrested and charged and found guilty for violating voting rights. In her defense, she quoted from the preamble of the Constitution and declared that, quote, "It was we the people, not we the white male citizens, nor yet we the male citizens, but we the whole people who formed the Union. And we formed it not to give the blessings of liberty, but to secure them, not for the half of ourselves, and the half of our prosperity, but to the whole people, women as well as men." Susan B. Anthony was a Unitarian from childhood. Her father switched to the Unitarian Church when the Rochester Quakers didn't support the abolition of slavery. Throughout her life, she understood action as her prayer. She wrote, "I pray every single second of my life, not on my knees, but with my work. My prayer is to lift women to equality with men. Work and worship are one with me." Her friend, Olympia Brown, or I should say the Reverend Olympia Brown, was born in 1835 and grew up in rural Michigan. From her Universalist mother, Olympia was taught from a very early age the value of education. She couldn't get enough learning and eventually found herself in seminary, after which she was ordained. As a wildly misunderstood female minister, Olympia Brown was given the most difficult congregations in rural settings. She took it upon herself to travel across Vermont countryside, spreading the good news of Universalism. As her reputation as a preacher grew, Brown began to receive letters from Susan B. Anthony. Anthony was courting Brown to use her talent for women's rights. Slowly but surely, a deep friendship grew out of their shared concern. As the cause took a prominent place in her life, Olympia Brown eventually left her congregational ministry to be a full-time activist. Her first major assignment was a campaign for women's suffrage in Kansas. She traveled hundreds of miles, speaking to hostile gatherings with no amplification in Kansas for an entire summer. She tried her hardest. When the campaign in Kansas failed, she was devastated. I want to share you a little bit of a letter that Susan B. Anthony wrote her dear friend, Olympia Brown, in that moment of failure. She said, "Never was so grand a success. Never was defeat so glorious a victory. But don't despair. We shall win. The day breaks. The eastern sky is red. If ever any money gets into my power to control, you shall have evidence that I appreciate the Herculean work you have done here in Kansas these past 4 long months. There is a wise destiny in our delay. It is not defeat. So let us hope and work together for a brighter day. God bless you and keep you safe and alive to see the glory of our work accomplished. Affectionately yours, Susan B. Anthony." I love this letter between friends. It embodies the need for friendship when we face challenges that seem insurmountable. Who better than a friend to pick you up and dust you off in the long struggle? Who better than a friend not only to say that's okay, but also to say we can't give up now? It's this letter, in this letter, we see one small strand of a web of sisterhood that made the struggle for women's suffrage a success. Who knows where either of these two would have ended up without their mutual support? Who knows where the movement would have ended up? It's tough to stay committed as a lone voice, but friendship made it possible and still makes it possible today. I believe that real, authentic friendship is an incredible force. Becoming better friends is a form of resistance. Taking the time to return a text message in a timely manner or trusting your friend with what's on your heart deepens our web of compassion in this world. We usually think of friendship in terms of self-care, but this week I invite you to consider the power of building more love and trust in our world, one relationship at a time. It's a powerful way at pushing back at fear and isolation. The next story I would share with you is another Unitarian who caused good trouble. Henry David Thoreau wrote Civil Disobedience around the same time in 1849. I've described the impact of that essay, Civil Disobedience, as one of the most influential pieces of political writing. It deeply influenced Gandhi. Gandhi said, "I adopted some of his ideas and recommend the study of Thoreau to all my friends. Why, I actually took the name of my movement from Thoreau's essay." The essay has serious intellectual heft. It's a treatise on when and how people of conscience are responsible for defying the laws of their own government. Now, he took a very dim view of government. He thought that all government was primarily an agent of corruption in the world. You've probably heard that saying, that government is best which governs least. Yeah, that comes out of civil disobedience. As he wrote those words, the Mexican-American War expanded slavery's dominion by 500,000 square miles. And the regressive fugitive slave law made it a felony for a free person to provide any assistance to an escaped slave. And it made life for free black people anywhere in the United States incredibly difficult, as they were in constant danger of being forced into slavery. Both of those injustices were theoretically legal. They enjoyed support by the majority. In his view, democracy had little ability to correct the corruption of government. He pointed out that majorities don't gain the virtues of wisdom and justice simply by having more people. Because democracy is fundamentally unable to steer government toward justice, it rests on the conscience of each individual within society to leverage his or her own deeper wisdom. People of conscience are called to cease their cooperation with the machine of government wherever it is a weapon of injustice. He argued that abolitionists, those opposed to slavery, should completely withdraw their support of the government and cease paying taxes, even if it lands them in jail. This all came about, or so the story goes, because in 1843, Thoreau refused to pay his poll tax to protest slavery in the Mexican-American War. Now, it's also important to recognize Mr. Thoreau's incredible privilege. He knew well that he would land in jail for not paying his taxes, and he did, for one night. Someone anonymously paid his taxes, probably a family member, and he was released. Incidentally, the tax collector was his personal friend. The tax collector offered not only to lower the fee, but to pay the tax himself for Thoreau. But Thoreau refused on moral grounds and spent the night in jail. Why this story this week? Because I hope that Thoreau reminds us that not cooperating is an option. I'm not suggesting you skip paying your taxes. We probably won't bail you out. I am, though, suggesting that you refuse to be silenced. I'm suggesting that we find hope and joy and love and live wholeheartedly in our full humanity. I'm suggesting that resistance can look like joy and even parties. They may be selling fear and hate, but that doesn't mean we have to buy what they are selling. Another important figure of our history, Thomas Starr King. He's a little closer to home here in California. Some of us know him as an important Unitarian and Universalist minister. Following in his father's footsteps, when he was 21, he became a Universalist minister at the local church. But then, when he was 24, he changed to serve the Unitarian church. He served as an ordained minister in both Unitarian and Universalist denominations 100 years before they merged. In 1849, Thomas Starr King was appointed minister of the Hollis Street Church in Boston. This was a really prominent position. He quickly became one of the most famous preachers in New England. Preachers were a big deal then. It was legitimate fame. He also traveled broadly as a speaker. During those years, he also vacationed in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, and that's where his love of nature flourished. He came to see nature not just as something that was pretty, but as a source of truth, something worthy of our most sincere attention. But in 1860, the First Unitarian Church of San Francisco called him to be their minister. He followed that call in a move across the country that probably shaped American history. Thomas Starr King was also invaluable in preserving the Yosemite Valley. He visited shortly after he arrived in California and fell in love. But what I really want to share today is about how he engaged with and made a difference in the Civil War. He spoke powerfully for the Union and managed to raise unbelievable amounts of money to support the Union's cause. On George Washington's birthday in 1860, King spoke for 2 hours to over 1,000 people about why they should remember Washington and preserve the Union. Afterward, he said, "I pledged California to a northern republic and to a flag that should have no treacherous threads of cotton in its warp." And the audience came down in thunder. At the close, it was announced that I would repeat it the next night, and they gave me 3 rounds of cheers. King covered his pulpit in an American flag and ended all of his sermons with, "God bless the President of the United States and all who serve with him the cause of a common country." The contrast between Thomas Starr King's perspective and Thoreau's couldn't be more striking. Let it be a reminder that we need not be in exact alignment to be pushing in the same general direction. On top of his ministry, Thomas Starr King organized the Pacific branch of the United States Sanitary Commission that raised money for medical supplies for the Civil War. Through his speaking, he raised more than $1.5 million in 1860. I don't even know what that would equal today. It was roughly 1/5 of the total contributions from all the states to the Union. He's often given credit for saving California for the Union. Part of that was his words, and part of that was his fundraising ability. Now, in progressive circles, we shy away from talking about the importance of money sometimes. Sure, when it comes to our annual pledge campaign, we talk about it. Your organizations probably do as well. And we talk about oligarchy and the unchecked power of billionaires. I want to suggest to you today that giving and raising money is critically important as a way to change our world. We all have different gifts and talents. Some of us have the gift of wealth or access to friends with wealth. In these days of powerlessness, consider wielding some of the power of your purse that you do have. Raise money for legal defense or for health care for those in need, or chip in to help buy privately funded wilderness preserve. Even spending small amounts that fit within our budget on things that we care about can help reclaim a sense of what power we do have. The last story that I want to tell is actually the one that popped into my mind first. It's about our flaming chalice. It's actually, in the world of religious symbols, relatively new. It didn't come to our tradition until 1941. During World War II, the Unitarian Service Committee was founded to help war refugees escape persecution of the expanding Nazi forces in Europe. Waitstill and Martha Sharp, a Unitarian minister and his wife, were the first to staff the operation in Lisbon, Portugal. They undertook a truly life-threatening mission and left their children behind in the care of their congregation. Their initial efforts were fruitful, so soon they recruited other help for the effort. The Reverend Charles Joy, Elizabeth Anthony Dexter, and Noel Field came to work with the organization's office in Marseille and Lisbon. They, along with many refugee volunteers, expanded the relief organization. They paved the way for clandestine routes for people escaping Nazi powers. As the director of the Unitarian Service Committee, Reverend Joy felt that his fledgling organization needed some image to represent Unitarianism to the world, especially when dealing with government agencies abroad. They were also working across multiple languages in Europe, assisting refugees across borders. So in 1841, Joy commissioned a Czech refugee artist named Hans Deutsch to design a logo that could be used on documents. And that's where the early version of our flaming chalice began. Reverend Joy described that first drawing in these words, quote, "A chalice with a flame, the kind of chalice which the Greeks and Romans put on their altars. The holy oil burning in it is a symbol of helpfulness and sacrifice." This was in the mind of the artist. The fact, however, that it remotely suggests a cross was not in his mind, but to me it also has merit. We do not limit our work to Christians. Indeed, at the present moment, our work is 9/10 for the Jews. Yet we do stem from the Christian tradition and its central theme of sacrificial love. Eventually, the American Unitarian Association adopted the chalice as their central symbol, and in 1961, when the two traditions merged, it became our symbol, as it remains today. This week, the story reminds me of the value of symbols of resistance as we find one another, coming together to improve our world. Whether that's a rainbow flag or a coexist bumper sticker or a peace sign or a pro-choice message or a logo from your favorite organization, signaling to each other that we are not alone matters. It can give a glimmer to hope to that marginalized person who's feeling fearful and alone. And it's a silent, subtle way of connecting with our team. Our chalice, our symbol, was created for people to identify each other and garner respect in really, really dangerous circumstances. It's worth thinking how we present ourselves to the world visually today. How do we let it be known that you value love, equity, justice, and interdependence in a time when those values are under attack? Our UU history is filled with remarkable people. It's actually really humbling to read about them. But they also lived through challenging times when the country was on the line. They came face to face with profound evils. We, too, can side with love by being great friends to one another. We, too, can refuse to comply with hatred in ways that are big and small. We can also spend and direct the financial resources in our sphere to influence our world toward good. And we can let ourselves be known in bold and subtle ways. None of us alone can change the world, but together we have for hundreds of years, and we will continue to have an impact on these United States. Amen.